Here we go. Here we go. I think we're live.
We are. Hey.
We are. This is so exciting.
There's a little bit of a
Welcome
YouTube
back.
delay. Yes, welcome.
There is a YouTube delay.
So, oh my God, there I am a few seconds ago. Hi, everybody. We see you in the chat. We see
Tell
you.
us where
Thank you
you're
for being here.
Because you know Tananarive loves a chat.
I do love the chat. That is like the kitchen of a party, is the chat. Everybody gathers there. Totally is the kitchen. So yes, here we go. Here we go. Welcome to Octavia. Try to tell us.
Kindred pop-up edition. We are so excited about doing this. And like everything else, this began between our texting each other like, hey, why don't we do such and such?
It was your idea. I have to give you credit. And December is busy. So my first thought was, ooh.
She was like, no.
I'm so glad. I don't think I said no, but I'm so glad that we decided to do it, because as we got closer to the series being released and having had the opportunity to go to the premiere, I got really excited and I said, yes, we need to do this for sure. Oh, Black women and artificial intelligence. I see you. I think I follow you on Twitter.
Let's do our official start, because we have some really great jewels and we're looking forward to a good conversation. We tried not to talk about it too much, although we did, so that we could, save it all for y'all.
Yes.
So Octavia tried to tell us this is 24, Kindred Goes Hollywood edition. We're following our usual format. We'll introduce ourselves for anyone who doesn't know us. We're going to chat a bit, and then we're going to keep checking the chat for the Q&A as well. Please, if you're on social media, this is usually what you say, Tananarive.
Yes, they haven't chased me off Twitter yet.
If whoever's left on Twitter, yes. Or even on Instagram, if you're using a hashtag, use hashtag OctaviaTried. And I am happy to share who my co-host and my friend, Tananarive Due. She is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She is an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone on Paramount+, and 2 segments of Shudder's anthology film, Horror Noir. They also co-wrote their upcoming Black horror graphic novel, The Keeper, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. Due and Barnes co-host a podcast, Life Writing, Write for Your Life. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House, and maybe she'll talk about her upcoming book. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She and her husband live with their son, Jason.
Okay, I'm sorry for making you read all that, but you'll get even now. The Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, I have to add that part, is the John and Patricia Cochran Scholar for Inclusive Excellence, Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which happens to be the church of my grandmother, an initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion, and mental health, and navigating change. She lives in a lively intergenerational household where she is an avid vegan cook and cyclist. And you can see she's Reverend Dr. Monica on her socials. We're back. It feels like old times.
It feels like old times. Only we have left the house a little bit more.
We have left the house, and there's a lot more going on. Well, we have a lot to talk about just with Kindred and Octavia. And I kind of have a surprise. I just sprang this on you, Monica. And is it time? Or is it too early?
Hold on. I think I forgot to give me 1 second.
Sure. The tech side.
Okay. Side. Oh, no, we're good. Yep, we're good.
We are good. See, I knew it. I had faith. So I'm going to share just audio on my computer. Some of you may have just heard, or you may already know that I take part in a podcast with Steve, and Sunday's episode is a tribute to Octavia Butler, where we're going to play several excerpts of interviews with her. And while I was listening to that, I thought, oh my gosh, we should play this excerpt of Octavia when we're talking about her books and her writing, and one book in particular. So fingers crossed that you all can hear this and that this works.
Yeah, after I finished The Trunk, and that wouldn't just be those novels, but for instance, Clay's Ark would have been part of it, just because I had always said I wanted to do a novel on how the Clay Arks came to be. Mm-hmm. Wild Seed would have been part of it, although Wild Seed was more in a line of giving myself a reward for having finished Kindred.
Oh, yeah.
Kindred was a long, depressing write. And
because of what the woman was going through?
Mm-hmm, because I really had to do enough research so that I had to understand it on a level that I didn't really want to understand.
Yes. Exactly.
You know?
Was there any specifically most disturbing thing that you came to realize about the institution of slavery that you had not understood before?
It's it's not that I hadn't understood it. Because in a way the reason I wrote this novel was because I did understand something of it. It's just that there's a difference between understanding it and feeling it.
Yes.
And that was what I was going for the feeling.
So which aspect of slavery specifically struck you most deeply?
It's something that is best expressed by a quotation that I came upon much later from Steve Biko.
Okay.
It's something like this: the most effective weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, that's not totally accurate, but it's very close to what he said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in slavery, well, I mean, that's the root of a lot of our problems now.
Yes.
People don't realize how much they have internalized, and it's still there.
How about that? Octavia in her own words.
Oh, that's just rich, right? As we've all been thinking about Kindred, maybe some people have been rereading the book. I hope we binged it. Are there going to be spoiler alerts? Should we just go ahead and say there's some spoiler alerts here?
You know, I mean, we should ask in chat. I'm only almost finished with episode 6. I have 2.25 episodes to go. I mean, I've read the book, so I know it's not headed in a good place. But has everyone watched all the episodes? If you haven't seen all the episodes, let us know in chat. And then we can sort of take an informal poll. Maybe there's a way we can sort of get close to spoilery without completely.
We'll see. Yeah. If I know I'm going to, I'll say,
okay.
Hit pause now, right?
But you've all read it. I mean, you know what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, but we were talking about this a little bit earlier about, is this an adaptation, right, of Kindred? Because we said Kindred goes Hollywood. And I said, I feel like it's more inspired by Kindred, right? That, and no book is in the movie are the same, right? That's always the case.
Right.
You can't do on screen, let alone in the kind of time you have, what happens in a book, right? Like no one can. And so I wasn't expecting like, this is the book on screen, but I'm like, oh, this really is different.
It
And
is.
even just, I'll say really simply, because you find out quickly, like Kevin's not her husband. I was like, oh, we doing a whole new thing. And so I guess for me, I'm like, oh, it's inspired by Kindred, but I do think that it stands on its own. Like if you haven't read the book, you're not lost. Like you can jump in
True.
and find out what's happening here.
True. And actually, I would, if it's okay, I'd like to address sort of how long a wait it has been for this adaptation. I know there are a lot of feelings about it. I can see the feelings in chat. Some people loved it. Some people did not so much love it. But before we even get into the series itself, I just want to honor really what an important moment this is, frankly, in television history, as far as I'm concerned, that we finally have an Octavia Butler adaptation on the air. That is something that people have been trying to do since she's, been since she was publishing. Years and years have passed since she passed away. Several teams have been at work. Fledgling is in development. Wild Seed, the Patternmaster series is in development. Dawn is in development, but Kindred is the one they got over the line first. And I have some opinions about why that is.
Yeah. But can you tell us a little bit about, right? I mean, I've lived in LA, but you are writing for screen too. Tell us what it takes for something to get made. What does it take for something to go from idea to actually getting on a screen where we can see it? And maybe what that attrition rate might be like.
It's frankly, I say it's a miracle every time a Black project gets to the screen, especially a Black adaptation, which is a little bit counterintuitive because Hollywood is fueled by adaptation. So given that we have such a rich publishing history, one might think that, sure, we would have a lot of Black adaptations, but we don't. We don't, as a matter of fact. It almost, I don't know this statistically, but it almost might be more common for original work to actually make it to TV and screen rather than adaptations. And I don't know all the reasons for that. Maybe white executives are not familiar with the books. That's part of it. There's an education process going on. But it's a lot, and it really depends a lot on the team. So despite what everybody's thoughts may be, I really want to shout out the showrunner, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, who is a Pulitzer nominated playwright, and also worked on Watchmen on HBO. So that is a pretty high pedigree. So for those of you, who maybe didn't like it so much, it's that level of talent that was brought to this, including Indy's directors also. Janik Sabrava, who directed the pilot, was also the director of a movie called Zola, which I don't know if you all saw, but it's almost an indie, very art movie based on a Twitter thread. Very wild energy. And you can see the restraint that she used in that pilot, especially with sexuality, which I appreciated in the pilot for Kindred, because that was not the place or the time for a wild sex scene between anybody and anybody, including Kevin and Dana. Just so many people. I'm just looking at IMDb, and the cast is okay. But back to your question about what it takes. It takes a lot of white people in power to say yes, frankly. Not to put too fine a line on it. For the most part, there are still not a lot of Black people or people of color who have green light power in Hollywood. So when you see these kinds of projects coming to the top, there have been agreements in terms of the storyline, the direction, whether it's going to be a limited series or a traditional series, which I think is something that will be a hot topic in this webinar. Why did you do 8 episodes in the cliffhanger rather than wrap it up in 8 episodes, which would have been possible? And I think part of the reason, or maybe the biggest part of the reason they did that, is because it's very tough to sell a limited series compared to an ongoing series, for the simple reason that an ongoing series will make more money for the company. It's year after year after year, as opposed to a one and done. So I don't think we need to look any further than that to answer that question. Like, why did they? Because that's what they could get approved. I don't know that for a fact. but that would be my assumption. Having done some pitching myself and seeing the difference in interest between a limited series and a full series, that's probably exactly what happened. They came up against that and they were like, sure, we can find a way to expand it. Because when you're in the meeting and when you're close and when you want to make that deal, you find ways to use creative flexibility to get to that yes. You want the yes. It only takes one no to stop it in its tracks. And I would imagine that this, and I don't mean to go on and on, Monica, but the reason I was able to go to the pilot premiere was because of a producer named Courtney Lee Mitchell, who is an executive producer on the show. Back in 2013, she first emailed me to say, hey, they've acquired Kindred. They want to get to know people who knew Octavia, which I thought was such a respectful approach. And that she remembered me almost 10 years later to invite us to the premiere. Trust me, that was the only invitation I got. And Stephen Barnes, my husband, knew Octavia very well. But we were only invited because of this one executive producer who knew us and who advocated for us. And the fact that she reached out in 2013 and it only came out now in 2022 tells you almost everything you need to know about how difficult it is to get something on television.
Well, and I feel like now, when we grew up, right, it was like we were our parents' remote control. Television went off at 8, right? You had to turn the big knob with the yellow screen, the orangish screen behind it. And now we're streaming, right? We can actually binge a series. And I mean, in some ways, I feel like we're living in, as we've talked about so much with Parable, we're living in the times, right, that Octavia was writing about, thinking about, not all of them, right, but definitely something that was not foreseeable, right, in 1980, anything, 1990, anything even, that this is the kind of technology we would be using even just to get to the screen adaptation, of Kindred.
And someone pointed out in chat that the showrunner won a MacArthur Genius Grant. So
I saw that.
Maybe that helps. Every little bit.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Every little bit helps. But, it really, Steve and I were talking about why we thought Kindred made it first. And it may be for part of the reason that for so many people, Kindred is their gateway to Octavia Butler. There are probably a lot of you here where Kindred was the first novel you read by Octavia. It's the novel, I'm sure, that is most taught in schools, that you're more likely to have been taught Kindred. Parable the Sower, maybe in a secondary level, but Kindred, and the reason for it is because it's so accessible in the sense that we all understand that slavery happened. We understand that history happened, and the concept of a woman being transported back in time, it's like, oh, you get it immediately. Whereas with Don, it's a little bit more of an explainer, with the pattern master, xenogenesis. There's a lot more to explain. This is like, right. And also, a little bit cynically, Steve and I were discussing, why did Octavia make Dana's husband white in 1979? There are thematic ways that it works. I mean, we're coming up against the beginning of the Reagan era, some growing conservatism in the nation, race relations and conversations you can sort of juxtapose then and now. So it's not a valid choice, but then we were thinking, I wonder if that was a decision to make it even more accessible to readers who are not Black, who like to see themselves reflected in the story. And on television, that becomes even more obvious because there's so much time that we're spent with Kevin, right? And the white characters.
But I think it does something else though, right? Because in 1979, that was much more controversial, right? There weren't television commercials with mixed race families on them like there are now, right? So I think in one level, it was edgier there and then, right? It's not that I don't believe anything you're saying, I completely do.
Oh, it is. It was edgier then.
It gives us these two perspectives, right? Which you don't often get in a book of Dana's perspective, right, as an African American, and then Kevin's perspective, and they're very different, which we know, but it kind of also highlights that it's disturbing for both of them, as we talked about on your podcast. Slavery is the horror for Black people, right? Like we don't have to make it more horror. That is the horror, but she gets where she's going and he does not. Like, she understands how slavery works, what has to happen and what doesn't have to happen, how she needs to survive. And he just looks completely bewildered. And he's like, just what? And even though it, that's part of what's supposed to happen, what they're trying to convey, that's not so far off, right? African Americans do know this history and we do know things about it. It's disturbing, but it's not new.
And thank you, Fran, also for mentioning, I'm sorry to interrupt, in chat, saying that 1979 was 3 years after Loving versus Virginia. So yes, interracial relationships were definitely still controversial in 1979. So it might just be that she thought, oh, it would be interesting to use this juxtaposition in history and an interracial relationship. And Kevin, I mean, you have to admit, he comes in mighty useful in the past.
He does. It does
at times.
But I think in some ways it also shows, particularly at that time, but probably even still, right, the complexity of loving across those barriers, right? Of loving across not just race, because there are all types of interracial, right, ways people can couple, but loving across someone who is a descendant of the U.S. slavery system, right? And then somebody who is white in that same, in that same cultural history, and that same actual history, that these are conflicts, right? That could arise. Like, our ancestors are not the same people, at least not in the same way.
Right.
Right. And that, that's important to kind of talk about. I think that's another thing that comes up.
And I think what the producers did to try to recreate that period in 1979, which a lot of people don't remember, right, was to set it with the rise of the Trump administration in 2016, sort of thematically juxtaposing our descent into fascism, or what certainly seems to be what right. A lot of people would like us to be headed toward, with actual slavery. So interesting. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the difference between Kevin being a husband and someone she just met at a bar.
You're right.
That's a big difference.
She met in a bar and then swiped on, a dating app, and this is kind of their first, second date,
What a date. Holy cow.
What a date. Like, I was like, wait, where's her husband? I kept looking for him, right, in the very first episode. And I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. And I don't know if it's that, well, you couldn't swipe on a dating app in 1970 anything. But it doesn't, part of what happens in the book is we understand, because he's her husband, why he's so committed and attached.
Yes.
Right, to her and to helping her and to making sure she's okay.
Yes.
And, you have to work a little harder to have a new guy.
Right? Some guy like basically might have been a one-night stand, except that the date took such a turn. It's interesting. Steve and I have also talked about this a lot. My husband, Stephen Barnes, is a science fiction writer, is that often what happens with Black male actors is that they are presented as eunuchs. And one of the way you create a eunuch and a Black male actor is that when we meet him, he's already married. I know that sounds terrible, but the wife is generally not that exciting a character. Think of your favorite Denzel movies where he was already married. There isn't heat on the screen between a couple that's already married. Generally films are all about the meet cute, the meeting, the spark, the first encounter. And keeping that in mind, I thought it was an interesting and maybe a smart choice, because I don't remember much about Kevin in the book. He doesn't pop for me. And I think meeting him as a new person popped in a slightly different way. And I feel like, and I'll see what you all think in chat, than having him witness what happened to her. You were on our podcast, Monica, and one of the things you talked about that struck you from the trailer was that he believed her, and how that feels when someone won't gaslight you and will actually say they believe you. And it's even all the more powerful coming from someone you just met, in a weird way, for me.
And they also have, I've seen some comments about, they have a trauma bond, right? They're orphans, right? And then they have the bond of this experience, but we get heat, right? I mean, and TV likes heat, screen likes heat. Like, they have some passion, right? They have some passion, and I kind of like that she takes charge right? When they're getting down, it's her like, hey, I'm pushing you down a little bit, like, and I think that's important too, because it shows so much of her consent when you're in a context that isn't going to have, right, the Black woman's consent.
Right. True. And Kevin, I like the fact that Kevin at one point was like, listen, this is not for me. I will hang out here and
I'll
be
stay
here for
back
you when
here,
you get
mission
back.
control.
But this is too much for me, and a part of me was thinking, oh, really? It's too much for you? You're not even enslaved. What are you talking about? But I get it. Of course. I mean, you just met this woman. Why would you want to be swept back into the slavery era with anyone, much less someone you barely know? But she brought him with her. So that was handled. But I thought that felt psychologically real for people who don't know each other, as opposed to people who are married.
And I like how quickly she comes into herself, right? The first episode, the very beginning, it seems like, she's just out here following her dreams, right? I mean, maybe not quite as fiscally responsible. Why is there no Wi-Fi in the house yet? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, isn't that what we turn on first? Right? And she doesn't have towels. And we're like, who is this kid? Like, come on, girlfriend, get it together. And then she like takes charge. She knows what needs to happen. Right? She's much more, she really kind of comes like, hey, this is who I really am. And I saw this in a TV show. That's how I know how to do this. And, you see that she's intentional, even about her writing process. Oh, how much did you love that Diane Carroll line? Can we talk about that?
Sure. The part what episode is that?
It was in the first episode. I think it was the first or second episode where she's watching these old Dynasty, right?
Oh, yes.
And he's like, what's Dynasty? She's like, let me show you the wonder that is Diane Carroll.
Right.
I just love that part.
Okay. I was a Diane Carroll fan. So yes, I am a Diane Carroll fan. So I totally understand that too.
I love that. But even just the throwback, like she's watching these old movies, right? These old soap operas, right? And just these throws in there about women's experiences, right? Where he says, well, people don't think about soap operas because women are the audience, but these are the most watched shows. So all over the place, right? There are these either more overt or more covert ways of talking about how women experience the world and how women experience it differently, or maybe in ways that people don't notice or publicize. Right. And as another way that's shown. And I like that.
Yes.
I'm like, okay.
Yes. I really, really, really liked the pilot. I'm almost always afraid to go out too much on a limb for a TV series based on the pilot, because I've done that in the past. And in episode 4 or 5, it's like, oh no, bad, wrong turn. And I have to admit that dynamic between Kevin and Dana in episode 2 was making some red flags go off in my mind, only because she had already been back in history twice by the time he went once. And she spent, it seemed like, a lot of time giving him emotional support through the experience. And also there were a lot of scenes where she wasn't present. So it's all Kevin with Master Tom, and it's Kevin holding court here. And I was like, are they going to make this a Kevin-centric series? That was my fear in episode 2. And by episode 3, I didn't feel like that was the case. But I'm curious about what you thought and what some of you in the audience thought.
Well, I definitely thought, I was like, I had to keep watching. Now I binged back to back to back, went to sleep, got up, binged some more, right? So I saw everything in like less than 24 hours.
Okay, so you don't even remember. So there's no delineation between two.
No, I remember it, but I was like, I hope this gets better.
But you all remember episode 2 though. Kevin is like, oh, what's going on? And she's like, relax, calm down. I'm like, what? Wait a minute.
Like, why is she comforting him?
Why is she holding his hand?
But right? I think that also the way I read it was because she knows what's happening and he does not know what's happening. And that highlights, that's kind of how things are in the US in so many ways. Can I talk about how the chats talk about the go bag? How they made a go bag?
Let's go to the go bag.
They made a go bag. I mean, she literally has that bag.
Now that's from the book. That is from the book. Yeah. Dana definitely had a go bag.
So the go bag situation is something that Octavia Butler's been thinking about for a long time. Like, look, we need to have go bags for all types of situations.
Yes.
Like if you haven't gotten the message yet, go bag.
True. And that was also great in the pilot, just sort of seeing snippets of the go bag, the gun in the refrigerator, which had no context at the time.
Right. And then we're
Just
like,
this,
oh yeah.
this idea of preparation, which is so familiar, not just as you and people in the chat have pointed out in Kindred, but in Parable of the Sower. And that need for readiness really is a thread throughout most of her protagonists. I mean, there's nobody who's able to rest easily in an Octavia Butler novel. Can we talk about tone and violence? Tone and violence.
Oh yeah, I wanted to get to family, but let's do both.
Oh well, whichever.
Let's do family first, then tone.
Family first.
She has a whole family. Number
she
one,
does.
There's a family black backstory, and I do like that it's like so black, right? Like look in the Bible, and you know, like there's a family Bible. There, you know, it. I like it. You know, all the different kind of dynamics, and I don't know if it was needed for screen. Maybe you can talk about that a bit more, but I like it because we kind of get to see how other people are seeing her, right? Especially we won't get to those neighbors, but how
Karen next
you know
door.
how right. But it helps that she doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It's not like it's just the two of them, right? Which you get in the book is more. It really is more just the two of them. But to have this whole narrative also shows this kind of more there's complex characters. There's complex emotions going on. And I like the part, okay, how do I not give it away? You kind of get this explanation for why and how it's Dana, right? Like there's this part where it's, you know, we don't get that. Right, there's a lineage thing that makes a lot of sense. You know, I'm like,
no, I like that.
Totally what it is. And
I like that. Octavia did not feel it was necessary, and I agree in the book to explain why. You know, it's like this is happening, and that's all you need to know. But with the responsibilities of trying to do a longer series, yes, they absolutely were going to
have more people to keep it
flesh out those characters, those dynamics. The aunt, who at the same time is, I mean, she's dismissive and yet smothering. But as the series progresses, you start to better understand the aunt and how she is and why she is. I actually started to sort of like her more, even though she tries to institutionalize Dana, spoiler, but of course she would.
But yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, she's a medical professional, right? And she's so aunt, like, you what? You've been here? You haven't told me all the right? It's like, wait, she is like that aunt. Like, I thought we were close. You're tripping. What's happening? But she still sends the uncle, right? Like, you need to go check on her.
Yes.
Right. I don't know. I have a hard time liking that uncle, but
he
does still go and check.
Yes.
Right. And if I can lay it out, right? They're not on her mother's side. They're on the father's side, right? And so then you also, you know, you kind of get it, right? That they're like, we're not even that close to the part that's really pulling on you right now.
Right. But like many family members, even family members we don't like, they often do hold missing pieces to the puzzle.
Right.
You know, I was talking to a family member recently about something that happened when they were little that helped me understand my mom a little bit better. So I feel that there's an authenticity to some of these side characters, even though because they're manufactured for the series, I think some readers are automatically not going to like them. I'm not talking about any of you here.
But like, I mean, but it gives, like I said, that's part where it's real black. Like, okay, I'm mad at you, but I'm still showing up, right? You know, and I'm still gonna like, what, you know, kind of do the things that, you know, we're still family, right? In that sense. And this is the funny part, because you know, we both live in the LA area, where he knew that she wasn't from LA because he's like, someone told you this was Silver Lake and this was not Silver Lake.
Oh, right. That's cute. That was cute. And that would be me. I have no idea of geography, and Waze has not improved that at all. I never know where I am. In terms of, I want to tie two things together, because earlier we were talking about the difficulty of an adaptation. And also I wanted to talk about the tone that this series strikes.
Yeah.
One of the difficulties probably holding this up was the fact that it was set partially in slavery. You know, there has been a little bit of blowback to slavery And it's not just, from maybe white viewers who don't want to confront that history, but also from Black viewers who feel that, like, there really haven't been that many. There's 12 Years a Slave, there's Django Unchained. There haven't been that many projects set during slavery. Roots was in the 70s and there was a remake, but they loom so large in our imaginations. And it can be difficult to watch. I know one of the criticisms of Antebellum, which, was that there was so much violence attached to the horror of that, that part of the horror was the violence of slavery. And I was personally very worried, having seen other Black horror series kind of fall into that trap of using lynching as horror, right? Mm-hmm. Or there are all kinds of violence that can be used as horror, obviously, but that is rooted in things that happen to our ancestors in real life. And it's not entertaining to watch that. So the idea of trauma porn, I think, was probably looming very large in their minds during this development process. And so the version of slavery we see in Kindred can feel slightly or not so slightly sanitized, right? Intentionally.
But it's Maryland, right? It's not Georgia. Right.
True.
And they say, and you get these comparisons even in there, right? Not that it's slavery light, right? But it's right. But that it is a bit different. What I'd like, though, is we see, particularly among the enslaved African Americans, these hard choices they have to make.
And that is the core of Kindred. That is very, very true to the novel.
Right. These hard choices, what survival looks like, how each character, right, tries to make survival happen, how those ways end up kind of conflicting with each other sometimes, where the pain is. And, we do get violence, but because we're getting this from a woman's perspective, not that there isn't that same physical lashing violence, because there is, but it's that threat, that continual threat of sexual violence, that having your children sold off violence, right?
Yes, that just... Yes.
Right. And so many of the movies about slavery aren't about the women's experiences. And so those are the significant, right, fears and traumas and horrors.
Just to clarify,
what happens with childbirth, what happens with all of that.
Oh my gosh, please.
Oh, I know. Right.
Even when Rufus broke his leg and the father was like, call the doctor, I said to Steve, literally, I turned to him and said, honey, if we get whisked back in time, please do not let anyone call a doctor because they are butchers. They don't know anything.
Bleed them out.
but back to what I was saying, I don't want to make it sound like I'm criticizing the series for not having more violence. I'm actually relieved it didn't have more. I don't enjoy watching whippings and sexual assault, obviously. So, and you all know from reading Octavia that a true adaptation of a lot of her work, if they kept in the violence, think of Parable of the Sower. What a difficult watch that would be. So trust me, when they make that, they will have to make some adjustments. But there was a New York Times reviewer kind of criticizing the approach it took to slavery. And I'm feeling like, on the one hand, you do want to honor the fact that this was a violence-based institution. But on the other hand, you don't want to re-traumatize and turn off an audience or entertain an audience that likes watching violence against Black people, frankly, so they're trying to walk that line. And I feel mostly comfortable with it. There have been some moments where I felt like Tom was not nearly as mean, and I don't mean just violence, but in terms of his demeanor. When Dana says some things to him, or when even Kevin says some things to him, I'm thinking that Tom in the novel would have reacted.
I said he gets there. He gets
there. Okay. Well, then maybe they had to create an arc, give him somewhere to go.
Yeah. There's a conversation to chat about the neighbors and how much we hate the neighbors, and which I completely do too. But it makes me think about the parallel, right? Between what's happening with the white people, right, in the past, right, in 1815, and what's happening in 2016, right? Like, they're still calling the police, right? They're still kind of watching and thinking they know what's best and what's going on and how things should go. So it's this parallel, but it's also showing, well, this still kind of the scary part, right? That
Yes.
that they're going to call the police. All the neighbors are standing outside. That they think they need to know and are entitled to know what's going on. And I'm so afraid of someone who hasn't actually done anything to me, right?
I see a conversation popping up in chat about the other big change that is obvious from the pilot, which is Dana has a mother who has also been trapped in history. And it is the biggest diversion from the novel. And thus far, like I said, I have 2.25 to go. Thus far, I like it. I like
it.
Establishing the lineage. You know what I really appreciate? There's this moment I just saw the mom talk about how she had to let go of who she was.
Yeah.
Basically telling Dana she needs to let go too of the idea that she has a family just because she found her and she's alive, but you're a grown woman. I'm like, oh my God, that's so harsh. But isn't that real?
That's what. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens during enslavement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dana was 2, right? So it has been a long time for the mom to have just left, right? I mean, how great is that little scene with the chocolate and the coconut, right?
Yes.
She brings her she brings her a
Yes.
candy bar, which I love. That's the candy bars in the go bag, right? It's not just survival stuff. Sometimes you need a candy bar in your go bag.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love it because there's that bond, right? And you need sage people who help you, right? They need to have guides, right? Every hero needs guides. And so,
yes,
right, because the mom has been there, she's one of the guides.
She is. And that is, that's one of the things someone was saying, this isn't as harsh as 12 Years a Slave, and it certainly is not. But one of the things that stood out to me in 12 Years a Slave was how solitary people were on that plantation. They were basically about their own survival. Joy, love, all these concepts seemed so remote, except for that one moment where he was singing with everybody. And even then, you're separate people singing together. They were separate. And also, I felt that coming through from the mom, like trying to tell her, this is what it is now. This is who I am now. And yes. So here's a question. What was Octavia trying to tell us in Kindred?
Right, we've been asking, right? We've been saying Octavia tried to tell us. So
that is the name, or as Toshi Regan told us, Octavia told us.
Octavia did tell us, right? What is that? I mean, what is she trying to tell? I mean, aside from have a go bag in every situation, whether you're in the past or the future, you need a go bag.
One of the things that I did not play in the excerpt from that interview is she talked about how she wrote Kindred in response to people who had criticized her for not being enough about the struggle, right? So, of course, here she is writing all these books where it's allegory for racial struggle. And she's doing something revolutionary by putting Black women at the forefront of stories where we have never appeared before. But, for some readers, they wanted it to be more real world driven. So she's like, all right, okay, real world driven, here we go. And I always felt like it was kind of the answer to that question when people say, well, if I had been back in slavery, I would have been this or I would have done that. And in fact, frankly, if I may be honest, Dana kind of disappoints me a little bit as a character in the novel because she doesn't do some things I wish she would do. Right. And I think that was part of her point, is that we think we know who we would have been during slavery, but we really don't. We don't know.
Especially because, it's jarring. There's these parts, right, where she's still talking like it's 2016. She's looking at people in the eye like, we don't do that.
Right. Right. That was episode 2. You may not remember, it was a blur, but she started to get her act together. But in episode 2,
she gets it together, right? She's wearing pants. Like here she comes dressed like a man, right? I mean, these little parts of that.
Like Tom is asking Kevin a question and she's answering, and she did it twice in a row. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what is she doing?
You gonna get killed, girl, right? Like, don't you hear the music, right? We're on this side. But I mean, I do think part of what she's telling us is this still shapes who we are, right? Just like in the part that you had from the clip of her talking about it, right? That this is in our past, but it's not in our past, right? We travel back to it, but it lives with us. This is part of the fabric and the culture of the United States. And so I do think that's part of and you can't forget, or if you kind of forget, don't, right? That this is actually still happening, not happening in the same way, of course, but it shapes who we are. And that is something that we all need to know, right? Because part of what comes across, and I think especially in the screen version, is that Kevin doesn't get it, right? That he's a little bit oblivious to this, and that she is not.
He can afford to put on his little headphones and disappear into his music while she is out in the cookhouse and out in the attic and out being a Black woman in the 1800s in a slave state. So,
so I think that's part of the message. I mean, that is part of the message, is that no, we all need to know and be in tune to this.
And one other thing I think Octavia did really well in the novel, and which I think does come across in the series, and I think I'll be curious to know what you in the chat think about this, is while, of course, the impact of slavery on the African American population in this country is always undersold, always minimized. Like, why don't you get over it already? Steve's litmus test for a racist is a white person who thinks that white people would have healed faster from slavery than Black people did. And there are a lot of white people who feel like if this had been us, we would have gotten it. You see, there's no empathy. There's no ability to see it from our point of view. But at the same time, one thing she does in this novel with the brutality of Tom, and there's even a line about it in the series where he used to beat his son. He used to whip him. He used to flog his son to leave marks on him. And the mother finally insisted that he treat him like one of the slaves. The impact of the violence that it took to uphold the institution of slavery was not confined to the slave quarters, right? There was obviously these women were being beaten up, and their mistresses flaunted in their faces. The children were being beaten. I really do think that you don't turn that off and on. Like, if you're flogging people like cattle as a part of your job or building your wealth, you're not turning that off when you go into your house. And I really feel like this whole culture of violence that we're still dealing with today in this country, so much of it goes back to slavery, not just for us in the African American community, but also in the white community. And that has been largely unacknowledged.
Right. And that, I mean, we see it as it's shaping Rufus, right? We see that, I mean, it really comes across so much there. And we see this kid doing stuff, which is, fairly accurate. We're like, yo, you're a kid. You don't get to do that. It's, our kind of contemporary view. But yeah, it shows how it's shaping. And I was thinking that too, as you were saying, I'm like, yes, that's totally what happens, right? That this has shaped all of us, right? In different ways. But it shaped all of us. And as we talked about at the very beginning on your podcast, and all of it, it's a horror, right? Mm-hmm. It is a horror. And it's based in so many ways on dehumanization.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I thought about, how we've been talking about Black Lives Matters for X number of years, right? Because you have to say it because all other evidence shows our lives don't matter, right? And it's the same. I mean, I saw the same thing like this. You can do this because you're not seeing this other person as human.
Yes.
Right. Whether it's your child, your wife, the enslaved African Americans, like the only other humans are the other white men.
Right.
Kind of.
So,
right.
Because maybe if they're the right class.
Right. Maybe if you're if
they're the right
class. So it requires this dehumanization, like really believing that lives don't matter. Right. But then that's that conflict, right? Because there's that conflict that arises, and we see it kind of late, where Tom is, doing his dehumanizing thing all over the place, and Kevin calls him on it, right? And it's this other interracial relationship, not nearly as consensual as Dana and Kevin, right? But that's where he's like, and he doesn't, he gets so upset about being called out on this, right? As compared to saying, no, that's not true, because it is.
Yes.
Right? And it shows that conflict again, that you're saying you're dehumanizing this person isn't real, that I'm not really catching feelings, but you have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The denial, the level of denial of the dehumanization, the level of denial of the brokenness of the system and of those households. And I think Octavia was really trying to portray that in her novel and did a great job. And the series does also touch on it.
It does, and I'm waiting. I need season 2. Like, come on, y'all! Can we everyone watch it so it gets some good numbers so we can get season 2? Because I need to know what happens, right? Like, I need,
when Courtney told me at the premiere that they were doing a traditional series and not a limited series. And I don't know how it came up. Maybe I had just assumed that it was a one and done. And she said, oh no, we're doing a series. There was a look on my face that I had to rapidly change, because it was her night and I didn't want to dampen it. But I actually said to her, I hope Dana gets to come home, because you all know what happens with series. Sometimes they get canceled before the story has been resolved.
Well,
and
I mean,
that would suck. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's this is a spoiler, right? Can I spoil it? Can I not? Right.
Cover your ears if you don't want to hear a spoiler. I can handle it.
Right, you can handle it. Not only does she get to come home, other people come home, right? I mean, this is the thing. It's like everyone's at home, but we don't know what happens. Right. We don't know what happens as they're home. We don't know if, especially now that Rufus is up in Baltimore with, is gone somewhere else. We don't know. Like, wait, what's going to happen? Right. And then she realizes she's been protecting the wrong people the whole time.
Are you kidding me? Wait, so you're telling me they basically do wrap up the storyline that we know from the novel in season 1, and then it opens up beyond the novel?
But there's a lot beyond. There's a lot beyond.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot beyond. So,
that's a good
it's the
approach.
same thing where, can I just bring in the spiritual part, right? Okay.
Okay.
So, right. I mean, she realizes that she has to, in this very genetic way, like, I need to keep my ancestor alive so I can be born, right? I need to make sure all these couplings happen and he doesn't get killed and all these things, right? So that the present day will end up being the present day. But there's also this part about, can you heal your ancestors, right? Can you heal the past? And, in traditional Yoruba religion, we believe you can. Right? That, whether it's through rituals and through prayers, but that you can heal your ancestors in some ways, and then that changes what happens that changes who we are now, right? Whether it's the way we think about them, the way we understand them, whether it's a kind of actual, kind of elevation of their spirits, right? But it's going to whatever happens, it changes her, right? So even if she's just able to kind of make sure everyone stays alive, she's not alive the same way, right? And we get to see these parts, especially in her relationship with her mother and the way things start to move with her aunt. You see, she is beginning to heal because she's bringing the answers to what everyone else had called crazy, right? And so, I kind of like that. I like that part.
I mean, I don't know. I hesitate to ask this just because it's so spoilery, but we're talking about it now. My question is this then. It's not just about Rufus being alive that ensures that Dana is born. Part of my deep frustration with Dana in the novel was that there were certain acts of protection she was not willing to step up to unless her safety was endangered, right? And she, like many of us, is the product of an ancestral rape.
Right.
So how are they addressing that? Or are they?
Well, that doesn't get addressed. It's just actually who it is, right?
Okay.
So it's but that's still gonna, well, presumably, right? Because it could be possible that they get to a northern city or a more northern city, right? And this becomes a consensual relationship.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Okay,
It is.
okay.
It could, right. I mean, I could see how it could, unfurl that way from the way they've kind of done it. So we don't see, but they have definitely left us stuff to look forward to. I can say that. So
Wow.
that's why I said it's inspired by the book Kindred. It's
Right,
definitely
more so than a
not the
direct.
same. But we do still get Butler's words. Like they come from different people, but have you noticed it? Like we still get some of these lines. I'm like, oh yeah, and I can only imagine how amazing it would have been for her to see this.
Yes, that was something that was very present with us at the premiere, because it was a very special premiere. For a lot of premieres, they just, you're in a theater. Sometimes they don't even give you popcorn and you're just watching the movie. This was a whole event, baby. They had like a whole art display with historical photographs on the wall to sort of like make you feel like you're walking through a tunnel to the past. It had seating at tables set up like a Southern tea, luckily no cotton plants. I have literally heard that there were some film executives who were doing a slavery themed thing, and they were thinking, oh, the party, we could have cotton. So no. So they didn't do that.
That's why the Black person had to be in the room. Yes.
It really felt like very intimate and very special. They had these great graphics with different clocks to show you like time is a character in the story. We were just like, Octavia would not believe this. I mean, but there's so many times I feel that. When I go to the Huntington exhibitions, I feel that. When, there's so many things that feel so surreal. Now in 2022 compared to when she was alive.
But I'm glad that at least, we get to see it. And
I know.
That she has been brought to screen and brought to, so many people who might not, right, have had a chance to explore her works, to get her vision, right, and her wisdom that is helping us. I mean, this is what we've been talking about through the pandemic is, the ways in which we have to save ourselves, the ways in which we, think about survival, the things that we need to be well and to be okay, and the various ways that she, through captivating narrative, right, with all types of dynamics in it, really gets us to think about this. And with Black women protagonists.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, I cannot express enough how rare and important it is. It has been in literature and now is in film and television that Black women get to step to the forefront within their power. So that is really special to be a part of the generation that gets to see this happening, and to hope that we might contribute. I might contribute to seeing more of that, because obviously the success of Kindred will open doors for other works. My Soul to Keep, my novel, is in development with in a studio, and it has to be sold. It's not sold, doesn't have a green light, but people working on it, directors reading it over Christmas, and I'm hoping for some big numbers, and the bottom line is this: no matter how much you like or don't like an adaptation, to me as an author, the biggest takeaway is that millions of people who have never read this book before are now going to know that it exists.
Yeah.
And given that Kindred is such a gateway to Octavia Butler, I have no doubt that this series is going to not just bring her more readers for Kindred, but bring her more readers for all of her books.
Definitely. And I like ending on this note, right? That adaptations or inspirations, right? They remind they're still calling back to the book, right, and bringing it to a new audience in a new way, and that's what it's about in some ways, right? Is all the ways that we share our story.
Yes, all of the ways, and it's no series is perfect. Okay, I know some of you. I like the cast. I think I want to shout out Mallory Jackson, who I believe, let me make sure I'm getting her name right, who plays Dana, is fresh out of Juilliard. This is Mallory Johnson. Fresh out of Juilliard. This is like the first big thing she's ever done. So bear that in mind. I think she's doing a fantastic job. I like Micah
Yeah.
Stock as Kevin. Now, what you think of Kevin's character may be different, but he's playing the part as written. Okay. And I think he's playing it,
And I like that there is so much complexity. There is, they're new characters, but there's complexity and depth.
Mm. Yeah, they're not throwaways. They're not just taking up room on the screen, I don't think, for the most part. I think that they really do contribute to sort of this conversation about what is family, what is a strained family, what is lineage, what is it, what is loss, what are Karens?
Right.
So anyway, but this has been so fun watching you all talk about this in chat, and I'm glad that we've been able to provide this space so that we really can unpack it and talk about it with people who have not read it or watched it yet or read it yet. So it's hard to believe there's still people like that, but there are. So this has been really, really fantastic. You wanted to share something with us, Monica?
Yeah, or both of us.
Both of us, absolutely.
So one thing that we were able to do with this pop-up was to bring back our Shaping Change bundle, or kind of a mini bundle. This was something that we developed during the more intense parts of the pandemic. I don't want to say the pandemic is over, right?
No,
but
it's
during
not.
the more intense parts of the pandemic, because we just felt like we needed creativity, we needed to be able to reflect, we needed to think about these values, and we talk about these 7 principles of shaping change, and they are all over these, particularly for those who are really just needing more things to kind of spark your own creativity and your own reflection.
Yes, and don't underestimate the power of journaling. I after moving, I found a lot of journals I used to keep in the past. I have not been as good in the present, and the Shaping Change e-journal is really designed for you, the Octavia fan, to help take your love for Octavia's work and focus it toward inner work and reflection.
So you can just grab that at shapingchange.co. It's a digital download, so you will get access to it. And that was something that we were both saying, oh, wait, we can make sure this audience gets it, since we are not doing this every week or every month like we used to. But let another Octavia book get adapted, and we will
we'll be back
all over the place.
Maybe we'll have to come back for season 2. Let's just put it out there that there will be a season 2.
We are coming back for season 2.
And we will come back for season 2. And if you want to hear more of the excerpts from Octavia's interview, that podcast will drop tomorrow at lifewritingpodcast.com. It's just called Life Writing, Write for Your Life. Find it wherever you podcast.
Lifewritingpodcast.com. I mean, how wonderful is it to hear Octavia's voice after we've been watching her story come to the screen? So thank you so much for giving that to all of us.
This video will be up and captioned. Sorry, it wasn't captioned the first time, but it will be captioned when it goes up again. So look out for it. Thank you all for coming. I see so many familiar names. I can't even call you all out, but I have loved watching the chat as always. And it feels just like a meeting with old friends. So everybody enjoy your weekend, enjoy your holiday season, however you celebrate it. And let's all look forward to a fantastic 2023. Hi, Piper and Lisa.